I never thought my marriage would end with papers served, but here I am, looking at the pile on the table, and still trying to convince myself I did nothing really wrong, even though everyone around me says I crossed every line worth mentioning. My name is Isolde Merin. I am 34 years old, and I work as an office administrator in a bland building where nobody pays much attention to anyone. Yet somehow I convinced myself I deserved attention from men far outside my marriage. My husband Daniel Merin is 36, an accountant who has always been steady, dependable, and serious about life. But I often decided that made him boring compared to the silly thrills I could find online. We have 2 children, Lily, who is 9, and Noah, who is 6, and both of them believe their parents are strong and loving. Though lately, they must have felt the tension growing like a shadow in every room. I used to tell myself that messaging strangers on the internet was normal, harmless entertainment, like scrolling through news headlines or playing a silly game during breaks. But Daniel clearly saw something much darker in it. My sister Marla laughed whenever I bragged about my inbox filling with flattery, while Daniel frowned at me across the dinner table, as if I had just disrespected everything we had built together. I enjoyed the rush of little red notifications, like a secret audience waiting for me to perform, while he buried himself in tax files and spreadsheets that left me feeling invisible. At family gatherings, I sometimes hinted that Daniel was overreacting whenever he asked about my late-night phone use, and I played it off as insecurity instead of what it really was, which was doubt about loyalty. I told myself that all women deserved admiration, that men outside the marriage simply proved my worth, while ignoring the way my husband's parents started whispering about my behavior whenever we visited their house. I always managed to twist the story into something flattering for me, because manipulation is easier than honesty when you believe you can outtalk anyone who questions your choices. What I did not expect was that Daniel would stay silent long enough to gather everything he needed, while I bragged to my friends about how I had him under control. Now I realize the silence was not weakness, it was strategy, and his patience became the sharpest weapon I have ever faced. It began in our living room late one evening, when Daniel asked why I always clutched my phone so tightly, and why I stayed awake long after he went to bed, scrolling with that little smile I could not hide. I told him he was acting paranoid, and explained that everyone messages random people these days, and that social media is practically built on harmless chatter, so he needed to relax. He looked disappointed, but I insisted his reaction proved how insecure he was compared to my sister, who always said men should be grateful for a wife who draws attention. I framed myself as the confident one, while painting him as jealous, until even the children sensed his quiet frustration, though I brushed it off as their father sulking again. Later that week, I carelessly left my phone on the counter unlocked, and Daniel walked by, noticing notifications piling up from names he did not know. When I returned, I found him holding it in silence, with his expression unreadable. At a dinner party with friends, I decided to turn the tension into a joke, because nothing feels better than laughter at someone else's expense, especially when it keeps the spotlight squarely on me. I told stories about how Daniel hated my harmless inbox admirers, and how he acted like an old man, threatened by shadows, while everyone chuckled at the picture I painted. Marla leaned across the table, encouraging me by saying he should be proud instead of worried, while Daniel's parents stared down at their plates with faces frozen. I enjoyed the way our friends giggled and whispered about how sensitive my husband must be, and I felt almost triumphant watching him shrink in the room. Instead of defending himself, he grew quiet, which I used to suggest he secretly knew I was right about everything. I raised my glass and claimed a modern wife deserved attention beyond her husband's narrow circle. Then, without warning, Daniel stood up, pushed his chair back, and left the restaurant in silence. Back at the office, I leaned into my little game, exchanging more messages with Evan, a man from the gym, who always typed compliments that fed the part of me hungry for attention. I told myself it was nothing serious, just playful distraction during breaks, and I convinced Marla that Daniel had already accepted his role as the boring husband. At home, his behavior shifted in a way I did not expect, because he stopped asking questions and moved through the rooms like a ghost, carrying his thoughts carefully hidden. I dismissed his silence to the children by saying their father was sulking again, and that he needed to grow up instead of worrying about imaginary rivals. Lily asked once if she had made him sad, which I laughed away without concern. That weekend, Daniel quietly requested access to every joint account and insisted on handling bills directly. I claimed he was being controlling, yet inside I felt an unfamiliar unease, as if something larger was unfolding beyond my control. One afternoon, I met Marla at a restaurant to complain about Daniel's sudden obsession with finances and his distant behavior that made me feel unwanted in my own house. I told her he was turning into a controlling husband who wanted to clip my wings just because I enjoyed harmless conversations online. She nodded along and encouraged me to stand firm, while I spoke louder than I realized about how unfair he was being. A family friend seated nearby overheard and interrupted to defend Daniel, saying he was a good man who never deserved humiliation like this. I tried to laugh it off, but the heat in my face betrayed the sting of being challenged in public. I told Marla later that Daniel must be spreading stories about me to turn people against me. She assured me I was still right, but I noticed her voice lacked conviction. Then, as we walked out, I froze, because across the street Daniel was leaving a law office with papers tucked under his arm. The following evening, Daniel asked me to sit at the kitchen table, where he calmly placed a thick envelope in front of me, without raising his voice. I opened it expecting some petty budget notes, but inside were printed transcripts of every message I had sent to strangers, including Evan, along with highlighted bank statements showing transfers I could not explain away. I tried insisting they were jokes, and claimed he was destroying our family over nothing, but his eyes never wavered. His parents sat in the living room, silent, while the children were sent upstairs, with nervous faces peeking through the railing. I accused him of betrayal for collecting evidence against me, but he only stacked the papers neatly and slid another envelope forward. When I pulled it open, I realized it was official divorce paperwork and custody filings, already signed on his end, ready for court submission. I felt my voice crack, yet he remained calm as if this had been inevitable. In court, I tried painting myself as misunderstood, telling the judge that Daniel twisted harmless chats into betrayal, while ignoring how lonely he had made me. He stayed quiet, but his lawyer presented every transcript and statement with precision that left no room for excuses. Marla avoided my eyes, while his parents sat firmly behind him, showing their support. The judge noted the consistency of his case and awarded him primary custody, along with financial control that cut away the comfort I once flaunted. When the gavel fell, Daniel stood tall without looking at me, and I finally understood his revenge was patience wrapped in lawful dignity. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city are you watching.